Kath started the lesson by writing the behaviour objective, working quietly in pairs on the board. She attracted the attention of the class using the signal.
Okay, Year 8. Ready to listen?
Her body language showed that she was ready to begin and sent a clear message that she expected the class to be ready to listen. She signalled discreetly to Mrs. Latimer that it was time for the activity in which Billy would use the pre-prepared sheets. Kath began by congratulating the class on some good work they did last lesson and linked the content of that lesson to the activity they were about to do.
We're going to start by visualising some two-dimensional shapes.
This lesson contained a visualisation. This can be difficult for some pupils who get anxious when they have to close their eyes. In particular, Billy feels very uncomfortable about closing his eyes. Before Kath asked pupils to close their eyes, she reminded them that this was a routine they had practiced. She did not expect Billy to close his eyes. At one point, Mike raised his hand to ask a question. It seemed he wanted to tell Kath that his pen was not working. Again, she used a non-verbal signal to indicate to him that it was not appropriate to ask a question at this time, and then continued with her instructions. Mike responded by putting his hand down, with no apparent discontent. In this part of the lesson, Kath used the smallest interventions to keep the lesson on track. Kath led the learning. She spoke clearly and calmly from the front of the class, scanning the class to ensure she included all pupils. She made eye contact and smiled to acknowledge their listening. Pupils were calm and attentive, and seemed to feel quite comfortable about undertaking this activity. When Tom spoke to his neighbour, Kath used a reminder to redirect him.
Concentrate, please. Now, imagine a large white equilateral.
She supported Mrs. Latimer in her role by signalling to her with a discreet, silent OK. Kath's instructions during the task were clear and focused, and she gave pupils the opportunity to carry out when she asked them to do before she moved on. While pupils were working, Kath continued to scan the class to check for understanding. Pupils appeared settled, calm and focused on the task.
Now 2 more small black equilateral triangles, and put these.
While pupils still had their eyes closed and were listening carefully, Kath prepared them for what she was going to ask them to do next.
Now in a moment I'm going to ask you to draw the shape that you can now see on your whiteboards. Can you still see it? Okay, open your eyes and draw the shape.
They were able to get on with the task straight away. Kath gave another clear instruction, which the pupils followed.
Okay, hold up your whiteboards and show me your shapes.
From scanning their whiteboards, she assessed that on the whole, the class had understood the visualisation exercise. She gave them feedback, which indicated that they'd done well, supporting this by pointing out that there was more than one correct answer. Kath asked Billy and Peter clarifying questions to establish what kind of shape they had drawn. She listened carefully to their responses and gave Billy feedback.
Good, good. Peter, what about you?
Can't remember what it's called, miss.
Before Kath could respond to Peter, Sally entered the classroom.
We have a policy of including pupils with special educational needs in our mainstream classes as much as possible. Billy, who presents on the autistic spectrum, has the same mathematical ability as the other pupils in 8PT. We think it's important to find ways to include him in the lesson so that, like his peers, he can learn, make progress and reach his potential. Kath and Mrs. Latimer meet when lessons are being planned to identify any areas that might constitute a barrier to Billy's learning.
And today we're going to start by visualising some two-dimensional shapes. Okay.
This part of the lesson involved visualisation.
Eyes closed.
Many pupils find it difficult to close their eyes completely in the presence of their peers, and Billy can become distressed when he cannot see what's going on around him. He also finds it quite difficult to imagine things.
Imagine.
He learns better if he can work with real objects.
White.
Kath and Mrs. Latimer are aware of this and planned a parallel activity for Billy to do while other pupils had their eyes closed.
Now imagine a small
Under Kath's supervision,
black
Mrs. Latimer prepared visual aids for Billy. In the lesson, while Kath gave instructions to the rest of the class, Mrs. Latimer reinterpreted her instructions for Billy. Because they had planned together, communication between Kath and Mrs. Latimer is excellent. In this lesson, they agreed discrete signals to ensure that the lesson ran smoothly. You'll notice that Kath nodded at Mrs. Latimer at the point that she expected some involvement from Billy, and Mrs. Latimer knew exactly what needed to be done. Kath respects Mrs. Latimer's knowledge about autism and often asks her for advice. Kath did not shy away from asking Billy a question at the end of the activity, and although he didn't make eye contact, he did answer her.
Triangle, miss.
She praised him.
Good.
Mrs. Latimer looked very proud of him. After the lesson, Kath and Mrs. Latimer will have had a quick word to evaluate the lesson and see whether, when planning the next lesson, anything might need to be done differently to improve access to learning for Billy.
When Kath is planning a lesson, she not only considers the mathematics that pupils are to learn, but also the behaviours she is trying to teach, which will improve pupils' learning. Every lesson has a behaviour objective. Kath reminds pupils of it explicitly in the introduction to the lesson and writes it on the board as a reminder to pupils throughout the lesson. We'll see later how Kath gives pupils feedback at the end of the lesson in relation to the behaviour she wanted to see. Kath sees promoting and encouraging behaviour for learning as being as much a part of her job as teaching mathematics. Throughout the lesson, Kath encouraged positive behaviour by making her expectations clear and giving pupils feedback on their progress.
You did some very good work last time on the sum of the angles in a triangle. And today we're going to start by visualising some two-dimensional shapes.
An important factor in the success of this part of the lesson was the way Kath gave instructions to the class. She tries always to give instructions from the front of the class where everyone can see her. Pupils recognise that information or an instruction is coming when they see her take up this position. This speeds up the time it takes to gain the attention of the class. They recognise Kath's signals.
OK, Year 8. Ready to listen? OK? 8PT?
As she gave instructions, Kath scanned the class to make sure that she had pupils' full attention and to gauge their understanding.
OK.
She used appropriate language and paused so that pupils had time to do as she asked. She smiled to acknowledge pupils who were listening.
Concentrate, please.
Kath continued to scan the class even when pupils had their eyes closed, to check that everyone was concentrating and comfortable with what they had been asked to do.
Equilateral triangle.
She made good use of non-verbal signals so that her flow was not interrupted and the class was not distracted. When Mike tried to interrupt Kath's explanation with a question, she indicated with a shake of her head and a hand gesture that this was not an appropriate time, and continued her instructions.
Now, we've done this before.
In this way,
so you
pupils
all know
heard a
it means
coherent set of
closing your
instructions
eyes.
without distraction from
Okay.
potentially confusing interruptions.
Eyes closed.
The effectiveness of her instructions was demonstrated by pupils' attention to task and by the absence of clarifying questions. It was while she was scanning the class that Kath spotted that Tom was not concentrating. She got him back on task straight away by issuing a reminder.
Concentrate, please.
This can be a good way of bringing pupils back on task and focusing them on appropriate behaviour for learning. Kath saying, "Concentrate, please," told Tom what he needed to do and also acted as reinforcement for the group. Kath could have said, "Tom, stop talking," but this would have drawn attention to Tom's inappropriate behaviour without helping him to understand what he needed to change. When Kath redirects, she speaks generally, to the class as a whole. By doing this, she avoids putting individuals in the spotlight.
OK, hold up your whiteboards and show me your shapes.
Scanning the whiteboards is a good way for Kath to assess how well the class have done with their task. Pupils who are self-conscious about showing their work to the class can reveal their thinking to the teacher without having it scrutinised by their peers. Kath's comment about there being more than one right answer would also have given pupils more confidence.
Good. Lots of different shapes to choose from. Billy, what shape did you
Kath
have?
asked questions skillfully.
Good.
She used pupils'
Peter,
names,
what about you?
paused, and then asked her question.
Billy, what shape did you have?
A triangle, miss.
Good, good. Peter, what about you?
Can't remember what it's called, miss.
She listened carefully to the pupils' responses. Pupils in this class are willing to take risks and aren't afraid to try new things. When Peter couldn't remember the name of the shape he had drawn, he seemed confident that Kath wouldn't criticise or berate him in any way.